This episode of The Buildout is brought to you by Farmers Gin. Whether you are building a bar, you currently are operating a bar, or you just run a bar at home, you need to have a martini on your menu, and that martini deserves Farmers Gin. Farmers Gin is created by the same amazing people that created Michter's Bourbon. Every single bar deserves a great gin, and Farmers Gin is perfect for creating all of the classic gin cocktails. Farmers Gin is made in Idaho at the first organic distillery in the United States. It's made using regenerative, organic, certified grain that's grown on a family farm. The regenerative approach they use supports soil health, biodiversity, and also just creates a really delicious gin. You can learn more by following Farmers Gin on their socials, at Farmers Gin, or heading to farmersgin.com to learn more.
From the VinePair Podcast Network, this is The Buildout, and I'm your host, Adam Teeter. On today's show, we're talking about Dante, a bar and restaurant that needs probably no introduction for most of our listeners, a bar that I feel like really helped reestablish New York as a top cocktail destination. There's a lot of bartenders like to say that like New York was out in the weeds for a while, right? Like got talked about in the early aughts and then sort of forgotten about. And then all of a sudden, Dante came on the scene and really, I think, reestablished New York City as this major cocktail destination, people traveling from all over the world to try the drinks that were made there. And the person we're talking to is the founder of Café Dante, Linden Pride. Linden, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. After some scheduling conflicts, I'm so glad I can finally land here.
Oh, good. I had them too. So, it's really amazing to have you on, a real treat. As we start the show, often we like to ask how people got their start. I think you've been mentioned by so many guests as being an influence on them too, either as their manager or cheerleader, et cetera, that I think some people who, if you've listened to the catalog of shows we've done, right, are familiar with some of your backstory, but I'd love to sort of, get a top level view of how you got your start in the industry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, really, like, I guess, I moved to New York 15 years ago, but I started in the restaurant industry at the age of 17 in Sydney. And
did you have family in the restaurant business, or you were just interested in it?
My mum's a food writer. So, when my parents got divorced, I was the date for my mum when she'd go and do restaurant reviews. So I was like a very hungry 14, 15-year-old boy who would sit in these restaurants and be able to, it wasn't a tasting, it was an eating for me. Yeah. But my mum was tasting and kind of exposing me to these restaurants. And in my final year of high school, because I think I was still running around a little bit, my dad said to me, if you really apply yourself this year, save up some money, what marks do you think you can get? And, I kind of set a benchmark and he said, how much money do you think you can save? And I think I said $10,000 or something. And he said, all right, you got to go and get a job and really apply yourself for the studies. And I said to my mum, I want to go and work in one of these restaurants. And she introduced me to a chef by the name of Neil Perry, who was really at the top of his game in Australia at the time and still is in many ways. And I said, I want to go and work in the kitchen. And so she introduced me to Neil and he said, mate, you don't want to work in the kitchen. He said, why don't you start in the bar? And I was, okay, great. So I got the job and so I was, halfway, I got the job and then I had to get through my studies and I thought I was going into this very formal, squeaky clean environment. And I started working at Rockpool and I was exposed to the restaurant industry and in all its grit and all its wonder and the waiters were going and smoking joints in the cars in between shifts, and I was thinking, what the hell, where am I? And needless to say, I had an amazing 12 months of my last year of school working in this restaurant, saved no money, and
saved none.
Yeah, none. Yeah. But then got a real taste to this, this world of glitz and glamour and grit and just fell in love with it. And at the end of that 12 months working at Rockpool in Sydney, I moved to London and started really, that was the beginning of my career. I think started in the London cocktail bar scene.
Did you know you wanted to go to London? Like, what was the reason for leaving Sydney for London?
No, I getting to know that family at Rockpool, we would sit down every day at 5 o'clock and have family meal where they would open a couple of bottles of wine and we would discuss the wine. And it was just, for me, it was just this it was just this immersion into this world that I just fell in love with. And a lot of the waiters had worked in London and suggested that I go and experience it. So moved to London and had an aunt there and was able to live with her and kind of, I remember sitting on her stairs, like reading a classic cocktail. I don't even know what it was, but it was sheets of paper I think I'd learned from like a bartending school, trying to memorize all the classic cocktails before I went for my interview, and kind of managed to fudge my way into a job at a restaurant called Pharmacy, which was designed by Damien Hirst actually, but an Australian chef was there, and got started in the London scene and spent a couple of years there. And the London scene at this time was like, it's the late 90s, early 2000s. The scene that was the driving force in the cocktail world at that time.
100%.
The Met Bar and you had Lab, with Doug and I just it blew my mind. And so that was really how I got my start. London, came back to Sydney and then went to university and what have you, but the restaurants were always in my blood and I stuck to it.
Were you staying in restaurants while you were also in university working and studying?
Yeah, exactly. So I went to university and did business and international relations and met my wife and my partner at the time, who's still with me now and the co-founder of Dante, at Sydney University, and we were both pursuing at that time kind of a career in the United Nations and international relations.
Interesting. Okay.
And
so business wasn't because you thought you would want to own something someday and you were getting a background in. It was more because you're interested in it in addition to international relations. Okay.
Yeah, I was more interested in travel actually, and spending time overseas. And I thought the key to that was working with an aid organization or an NGO. And Nathalie was doing her master's in international law and human rights, also in the NGO and at the United Nations University. But what I realized over time was, if I was really able to define my skill set in the hospitality industry, that was actually the international language and business that I could apply anywhere. I could, and I went and spent time in Hong Kong and in Southeast Asia and London, obviously, and I realized that as long as I was able to do the bartending at a certain level, I could work anywhere in the world. And that was kind of a bit of an aha moment for me. I was living in Costa Rica and we were doing aid work with the UN, and every time we would have a break or a gap, I would come to New York and just eat, and travel, run around the restaurants and then go back to Costa Rica. And I was like, you know what, like as much fun as that international moment is with the UN, New York is really what inspires me, and the restaurants are.
Huh. And so is that when you decided to move here?
Yeah, and that was like 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Obviously, the GFC hit, and I'd met a guy in Sydney who was the owner of a design firm here in New York called Avrico, and his name is Adam Farmery. And Nathalie and I both met him and had dinner in Sydney, and I was pursuing at this time, how do I get to New York? And then at this time, it was really only Sammy Ross who was in America from Australia. And as Australians, you have this kind of rite of passage where you all go and work in London at some point because the working visas were reciprocal and very easy, but not really many people were working in the US. We'd started a trade agreement and a working visa called the E3, but there wasn't like a lineage of people like I'd experienced working at Rockpool who had worked in the US and had come home and could share their journey and say, look, if you're going to go, you should focus on this visa and this is who you can work with. And there was no Australian community here either. So I was really desperate to come and work here and spend time here, but there wasn't a really clear path.
Right, because that invasion where like, I guess Nolita became like Little Melbourne, et cetera, really happened like what, in 2010, 11?
Exactly.
Like that was when that was a huge
Rubies.
You had
a fashion brand called Subi and obviously, like I said, Sammy was established here, but there was not this big Australian community. And so Adam had said, yeah, look, come and work with me, we'll work it out. But then the GFC kind of happened and Avrico kind of ceased its desire to grow restaurants. And because Avrico's a design firm, they wanted to own and operate restaurants to showcase their design.
What they could do,
exactly. And so it kind of got postponed a couple of years, and we kept in touch, and the opportunity really came up in 2010. And they had a restaurant called Public, which is a big part of my story and our story. But they also had a restaurant called Double Crown, which was on Bleecker and Bowery, and wasn't doing very well. It was a beautiful space, and the Avrico team said, "Why don't you come to New York? We're going to reskin this restaurant. We want to make an American diner with a great bar and so forth." And so I'm ultimately we were able to sort the visa out, turn it around really quickly. I just opened 3 restaurants with Neil in Australia, and I got to the point where I was like, I need to get out of Australia. I don't feel that I can kind of. I'm not inspired by what I'm doing in Australia. And so I was really willing to take any opportunity, and Adam created the opportunity. And I said to Nathalie, I said, "This is it, I've got to go." And she's like, she had just been living in New York and moved back to Sydney to be with me. So she was
so was she still working with the UN?
Yeah.
And you had left the UN to go back into restaurants and move to Australia.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. And she was here doing her thesis in New York, and she's like, "You got to move here." And I was like, "I'm not ready." And so she came back to Australia, and then, a year later I got this opportunity, and I came back to New York, and she supported me amazingly, and she said, "Go." And I took this job, and I remember.
And what was the actual job?
General manager of a new restaurant, which was to become Saxon and Parole, which was, I think the big thing for me was I was willing to take any job to get to America, and Adam really inspired me. And so I arrived here, and we created, Avrico created this concept, this American diner concept, and we built this bar program, and opened Saxon and Parole on my birthday, actually, in 2011, September 19th, 2011. And I remember getting here and getting my first paycheck, and I remember it was $689 after tax. And I was like, how am I going to live? And Nathalie was paying my rent, and anyway, we started this restaurant, and that was my first foray into the New York hospitality world, and it was amazing. It was everything I was aspiring towards and more.
What was similar to you about it from Sydney, and what was different?
Australia really, and I still think Australia's got a bit of this. It was all around the chef and the food. It's a real culinary led enterprise, where the thing that really kind of I found so tantalizing in America was that it was the whole package. It was design, it was music, it was the cocktails, it was the lighting, and it was the food, and people were coming for an experience. They weren't just coming to nitpick something on a plate. And that, for me, all of a sudden I was so inspired by what was really a lifestyle moment as opposed to just a dining moment. And I think at Saxon, we were able to blend the cocktails in with the dining into the music, and it became this scene, in this moment. And you would kind of come and engage with, friends, and it was this dynamic kind of space. And it really, it was exactly kind of what I was looking for, and what was missing in Australia that I couldn't really identify at the time. And in that moment, I remember I sat down at the bar, and when I first started, I came to the bar. I did like a secret shopper of Double Crown before we morphed it into Saxon and Parole. Sat down at the bar, and the guy that served me was this, and I was with Nathalie, this wonderful, cheery, beautiful Mexican fellow. And gave us this great experience, and that was one of the reasons that really won me over to actually signing the contract and wanting to be here, and that was Nacho.
So he tells the story when he was on as well.
Oh, right, okay, great.
that he basically was thinking about leaving, and then he served you.
Yeah,
and I think you ordered champagne. He says,
right,
and then his experience with you made him decide that he wanted to stay with the company for a little while longer. You also are the reason that they swing the lights at Super Bueno,
right? From the Daily. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and to jump forward a little bit, we had, Masa came and joined us, and he was working at Kingsley's in the West Village, which is now, I can't remember the name of what it is now. It's on West 10th and Greenwich. Anyway, and they were just such talent and such characters, and what I always look for and what we always try to build is business around these personalities, not not just a skill set, but like this sense of hospitality. And we opened a bar called The Daily, and I wanted to put Nacho and Masa together on Friday nights because I just thought, put all your assets together and let's just create a vibe. And there was a lot of pushback about it initially, but we created this scene on a Friday at The Daily where Nacho and Masa it was their show, and they would swing the lights and cut out watermelons and wear watermelon helmets and just give them free reign to do what they wanted, But anyway, those two really embodied that sense of hospitality. And I think that opening Saxon and Parole was my first opportunity to express kind of a vision of, or the kind of hospitality I wanted to create that I wasn't able to do in other parts of the world and up until that point. So, and that began my journey with Avrico. And, we ultimately, opened, I think 5 or 6 restaurants in 4 years, all around the world. And it was really like an MBA, like a master's of business in the street, in like opening restaurants from the ground up and hustling, and they would design building, we were doing it on a budget, and it was such an immersive and educational period for me. We opened a restaurant in Napa Valley called the Thomas, which was down on Main Street in downtown Napa, and we took over this bar that had been closed for 35 years because there was a murder in the bar, and there was two sisters, twin sisters. One of them left for the night, left the others to close, and this guy sat at the bar, and she couldn't get him out. And anyway, the next day the sister came back and found the body of her sister, and they shut the bar down for 35 years, cold case. And then when one of these a guy was getting, he was brought out on parole, and they ran his DNA, which is something they do when they, when an ex-con is getting out, they matched his DNA to the case, and anyway, he was tried.
Wow.
And so the bar was then put up, and Avrico took it over, and so I learned about like how, and so they revived this bar. It was called Fagiani's, and they revived this bar, and I learned so much just about like respecting the history and respecting the sense of community for some of these, special private enterprise that really is a public entity, and I learned so much about that from the way that Avrico treated these institutions. And then we opened Saxon and Parole in Moscow, which was an amazing experience, and it got to the point where Nathalie had moved back to New York to be with me, and I was now traveling around to Napa and to Moscow and all the rest of it, opening these restaurants. And she's like, well, firstly, I moved back to Sydney to be with you, and now I've moved back to New York to be with you, and you're not here, so like if we're actually going to do this, then we need to start a business together, because like.
So she was actually the driving force for you to start.
Oh yeah. I don't think I had, I don't think I would have had the courage to make the jump.
Interesting. So she says this to you. What goes into the planning? How do you start thinking about, first of all, leaving Avrico and then also doing it together?
Yeah.
Were you married yet?
No.
Okay.
Look, she's really, look, I mean, she's the heart and soul of Dante, really. She runs the culture, she creates that culture. She looks after the teams, and she can be very convincing, and she said, you've got to trust me. We can do this. And I said, how on earth are we going to open our own restaurant in New York? It's, and so, leaving Avrico was a really hard thing, because I felt very, loyal to them and what they'd helped kind of facilitated my education of the hospitality industry. They really taught me much more about business in an American sense, because the American hospitality industry is very different to any other parts of the world, in my opinion. And
what do you think are those like big differences?
I think that you can run a business here and well, particularly in New York, you have the opportunity to have a business that's 7 days a week busy. Like Australia, most restaurants are closed Monday and Tuesdays because people don't go out. Wednesday and Thursday, people are still at home with the kids, and you might do 40% of what you're usually doing. And then Friday and Saturday it's almost binge drinking. Everyone's out getting hammered. So you're running almost two different businesses. You're running a very, a quieter business and then a really crazy one. she said, just trust me. And I did. And we went out and we started, well, first of all, we tried to raise money, and like raising money is something I'd never done before. And
it's scary to a lot of people, almost everybody.
Yeah. And I think that, you've got to get to that point where I think initially when you first start raising money, you think that you're asking somebody for a favor. It's like, do you mind if I borrow your car? Do you mind if I stay in your house for a little while? Like you're asking this favor of people. But, I think what I've learned is that you're actually giving these people an opportunity to come on the journey, and if you can back yourself and you know that you can really create something special, you're bringing them along for the journey with you. And I think that I wasn't ready. It took me a while to get to that point, and I think that, we went back to Australia because that's where our community was to raise the money. And we were able to bring on 2 investors who were willing to back us, but they said, basically, you have to put in the same amount of money that we're going to put in.
I think there's a few things you're saying here that I want to hone in on, because it hasn't been said in this exact way. One is I do really resonate as a business owner as well with the idea that you have to project confidence. And I feel like every time I sit down with other entrepreneurs, whether it's in this, the restaurant beverage space or in the media, et cetera space, a lot of it is this idea of like, help me have my dream, instead of this is such a great idea that I'm gonna be successful for you.
Right.
And I think that that's a really good point. And then second, what I wanted to ask about is, we had another person on the podcast recently who was from another place, not from another country, but from another place, and wanted to open in New York, and said it was actually really hard to get their network in the place they were originally from, and they'd made a name for themselves in, to invest in a place in New York because it wasn't where they were from. How do you think you convince Australians living in Australia to invest in a restaurant across the world in New York City?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at its core, the answer to that question at its core is the same way that we think about Dante, and the same reason that we ended up buying Café Dante.
Okay.
Because I think that we realized that that we weren't going to be able to come out and do Nathalie and Linden's, Shake Shack, cocktail bar, whatever, and we felt compete with the landscape, with all these other bars and restaurants, and capture the market. Our opinion was the New York. There's no brand that's going to compete with the brand of New York City. And if we could create something that was emblematic and representative of New York City, then we could sell that all over the world and take that wherever we wanted to go. Okay. And I think when we found the opportunity to take over Café Dante, we had this 100-year-old brand that had, been in the same place since 1915 and had this lineage, and we had this opportunity to become custodians of that. And all of a sudden we had this legitimacy almost that, even if we'd only had it for 100 years and one day, all of a sudden, in the eyes of an investor, or how you want to position that brand, it's a 100-year-old legacy New York brand.
Okay. So the opportunity come to you before you raised the money?
We were looking. This is funny, and I've been talking to, some friends who are raising money at the moment in New York, and there's no perfect science to how you put it together. Whether you find the space, raise the money, finalize the concept, bring in the team, it's all got to kind of happen concurrently.
Okay.
And whatever lands, and then you build around it. If you find the ultimate space, then that's often a great catalyst to say to potential investors, I've got this great space on 19th Street, and wow, look at X, Y, and Z, and they'll buy in. Or, you get your investors lined up, and then you have the ability to actually define
what you're doing,
what you can afford. So, I think we'd missed out on a couple of spaces. Look, and one of them was this Australian, and again, we were leaning into the Australian network, and sorry, just to back up on the investment
Please,
piece, we weren't raising a lot of money. We were raising $750,000, and basically, we were trying to raise $250,000 or $300,000 ourselves, and we had to really, beg, borrow, and steal the money from wherever we could. From like we were trying to sell them in $10,000 lots, to family and friends, and borrow the money, and at the time, to bridge the gap between leaving Avrico and opening our own restaurant, we had a little foray into the Airbnb market. So we had an apartment and we were renting that apartment wherever we could. It was at 2010?
Yeah.
No, 2013. Airbnb was everywhere, and so
it was allowed all over New York.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't not allowed.
Yeah, exactly.
Wasn't not allowed officially. So we would rent our apartment and then go and stay in the $75 rooms at the Jane Hotel, and rent our apartment out for $250 or something, And so we were
literally arbitraging,
right? However we could. I mean, and we were just really trying to hustle to raise this money, and I think that gave us a whole different perspective on what we were doing, and it really sunk home in terms of how serious this was, because I think that you have to have skin in the game to attract the right investors. You can't just go out and ask for money and expect people to invest in you if you're not banking on yourself as well. So that was a really great learning for us, and we'd missed out on a couple of spaces, and one of them was on Grove Street, and it was a restaurant called Beetle, run by an Australian, and we negotiated the deal. It was a asset purchase, so we had key money, and on the night before we were going to go and sign the deal, the owner of the restaurant called me and said, "Listen, I'm not going to pay the brokers. You need to pay the brokers out of your key money piece." And as the deal was defined, the seller would pay his broker, and that would pay our broker as well. And so that added like another $60,000 on the purchase, basically, right? And at the time, $60,000 is a lot of money anyway. But at that was, for us at that time, it was incomprehensible. And we said, okay, I don't think we can do that, but you have to give us some time. Anyway, the next day he sold the restaurant to Jody Williams, and they opened Via Carota. So we had a concept lined up. We had a chef, and we were going to do this. We were going to do this Japanese like izakaya concept with a great cocktail bar, and we were so into it. I think it was going to be called Merchants and Traders. Anyway, we missed it.
It's amazing how things work out, though. That's first of all, that
heartbreaking.
What went in was Via Carota, so it was clearly a very good space, a good location, right?
Yeah.
But that also, it probably worked out for the best in a lot of ways too.
Oh, without question. I think that but at the time, Nathalie is such an optimist, and she, she's so positive, and she's like, if it wasn't meant to be, there's something better coming, and a couple of weeks went past, and our broker said, look, we have this off-market deal. They don't, then it's not negotiable. The key money's the key money. They just want to see the brand continue on if it's interesting to you. And so we said, okay. So we went down to Café Dante, and Nathalie and I went down there, and we met with Mario Flotta Sr., who's in his 80s at the time. And Nathalie and I together as unified front turn up, and we come out the back of Café Dante, and he didn't want to speak to Nathalie, he just wanted to speak to me. And we sit down at the table, he gets an espresso with some anise on the side, like a sambuca, and we have espresso. He doesn't even really acknowledge Nathalie's there, and we just talk very briefly about the deal and the license, and he's had this space since the 70s, and he just come out of hospital, and his son had been running it. And Mario Senior is he had hospitality in his veins. He used to have Café Dante. He had the space next door, which used to be Mermaid Inn. He had the space that is now Morandi as another restaurant. He had 2 pizza joints on Bleecker Street, throughout the 70s and 80s. And he just had kind of given it to his son, and his son had turned it into an internet cafe, and even 2014 internet cafe, I mean, probably still not relevant.
Not relevant,
yeah. He basically said, if you want it, it's yours. This is the cost. And we walked away and said, you know what? If we're going to do it, let's just do it. And we did the deal, and he literally closed on Sunday, gave us the keys, didn't tell most of the staff, and we walked in on Monday. And cleaned the fridges out, and started planning what would be a renovation. And the interesting thing for me is, in hindsight, I look back at what we did then, we literally pulled down the gates and did a renovation. And it was all aesthetic, obviously, and so forth. We weren't moving the bar, we weren't moving the kitchen, we weren't moving the bathrooms or anything. But just the blind enthusiasm and maybe ignorance that enabled us to turn that around in the way we did. And I think about, our latest project here on Elizabeth Street, which is a 7,000 square foot restaurant, and the amount of money we've spent on consultants, advisors, to navigate us through all the city permits and requirements and legal and insurance and the rest of it. The fact that we were able to pull down the gates and turn that place around in about 3-4 weeks is, incredible.
So you signed the lease. Were there terms you negotiated? Did he own the building too?
No, he didn't own the building actually.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the super for the building lived in the building, but she was away on holiday for the first 2 weeks. So we were actually able to get a lot of work done. But when she came back, she heard all the saws and the rest going, and she came in and basically stopped us working. But by that point, really all we needed to do was paint and bring in some new equipment and things. So we were able, we got very lucky.
Wow. Okay.
We opened the doors. A press piece came out in the Village Voice that basically had a photo of me. I don't know where the photo came from. Had a photo of me, and it said, "Australians are going to ruin Café Dante with avocado toast and flat whites." And the whole neighborhood was up in arms that Café Dante was closing. And we had totally underestimated. This public institution, we had become custodians of what was like taking over a piece of Central Park to many people. Like people who lived in the community had been coming there for 30 years and had like met their husband there or sat out the front and smoked cigarettes and drank coffee, or remembered when Bob Dylan had like lived across the road, and it was a part of their it was a part of their New York story. And all of a sudden these aliens had come from Australia and taken it over, you know, and people, and at that time, we literally reskinned the space, put in a more comprehensive food menu. We decided to stay open all day and all night because the day crowd was still people coming in for coffee, and what we wanted to focus.
You didn't want to piss
we didn't want
off.
to piss, exactly. And I just thought that's money in the door. Let's put in a cocktail bar and a drinks and a food program, and so we opened up, and those first couple of months, it was Nathalie during the day on the door, it was me on the door at night, and as waiter, and her as waitress during the day, and it was summer. We opened in the middle of June, and Nathalie was pregnant with our first child, and she would work service in a restaurant with no air conditioning because we couldn't afford to do the air conditioning, in a scarf, because she didn't want everyone to think that she was also pregnant. The pregnant waitress who's in an empty restaurant, she's like, I just want to focus on their experience, and so we just had to win over every customer that came in, because they were coming in and saying, I've been coming here 30 years. What have you done to the place? You've ruined it.
Did you always know that it was going to be like sort of an aperitivo Italian cocktail style bar? I think the design of the space, for you to say you turned it in 3 to 4 weeks, to me is also so iconic, with the Garibaldi paint, was that in your brains?
Yeah.
Or the second you took the space, you're like, this is what we're going to do? Or like,
no, I mean, look, growing up in Australia, and there's this enormous Greek and Italian community in Australia that moved there after the Second World War. And so we have this amazing coffee culture, especially in Australia, that's really founded from those European influences that are a second generation now. And where we grew up in Australia, and my mum being a food writer and a chef, we would, and her preference was always Italian. She had an Italian boyfriend before she met my dad, and she was very Italian linked. So we would always be at the local, we'd call them deli, but they were like an little Italian cafe where they would do paninis and cold cuts, and we'd always be out in the Italian restaurant. So I really grew up in that whole world, and I think that the Australian Italian community still really hung on to their roots, in that they would still make the passata, and stamp the tomatoes and bottle it and share it with all their family and community. And like even more so than when you go to Italy now, like a lot of those like 1960s, 70s traditions that still happen in Australia aren't as even present in, Italy continues to evolve. But these, I think immigrants hang on to their identity and their culture, when they move to another land. So we were really comfortable in that Italian setting. And interestingly enough, a lot of our family friends who were Italian, who had moved to Australia, had cousins and brothers and who all lived here in the Northeast, and in Jersey and in New York. And that was that big red sauce, as you would call it, I guess here, Italian community that came to America and again hung on to their roots in many ways. And so it felt very natural to be able to do a take on an Italian all-day cafe. And the coffee was very natural. And the bar side of things was very comfortable because, that was really my background and the food, we had a great chef we were confident in being able to have a great offering. Nathalie, although doesn't have a design background, just has a great eye and great taste, and she's designed all our restaurants. And at the time she was able to kind of change the color palette, put in some banquettes and restore some of the layout that we'd seen in original photos, banquettes in the windows again, and so forth. And like I said, the bar didn't move. Instead of the gelato counter, we put like a high top where people could sit, put the coffee machine in the window. We just had to really get to know the neighborhood. And I remember those first early weeks, I would wake up on a Monday and, check the bank balance because, a couple of times payroll would bounce because we're making $300, $400, $500 a day, I was, we had old regulars who would sit out the front and the reason they would sit there was because they were allowed to sit there and smoke. And so I let them continue to sit there and smoke because they were still spending money, right? So, look, we had to really build our relationship with the community. And I think as soon as people knew that we were the new owners and we weren't like some corporation or like they could actually connect with us and talk to us, they started to trust us, and I think that then they would try some of the food and we started to build a bit of a following and there was this great moment. I remember the New Yorker came in and I think it was maybe in October of 2016, 15. So we would been open for maybe 4 months. And we had the daytime coffee crowd and we had people coming in trying the Negroni sessions and the kids trying the Negroni sessions. And we had a couple of diners in there and it was this 3 very distinct demographics sitting in the restaurant at the time. And this I can't remember, I think her last name was Cooper, came in from the New Yorker. And I don't think she came in to write about it, but she sensed that New York moment when all these clashing of kind of social groups kind of were coming together and wrote a little piece about us. And it kind of was like a little heart starter,
But 4 months in.
Yeah. And we started then to get a little bit of momentum. And, at the time, 2015, like the Negroni was still very much a bartender's favorite.
Yeah.
And it was, I especially loved the Spagliato and the Americano but people were coming in and they were like, do you have a happy hour? And we're like, well, we're doing Negroni sessions out like moment. And they're like, okay, what's that? And it's like $10 Negronis between 3 and 6. And they're like, what's a Negroni? And it's like, oh, it's an Italian cocktail, and we kind of talk them through it. They'd try it. And we had like a deep dive and different options of Negronis. But at the time, it was also a real educational moment. And I think that was what was one of the key drivers that guests were coming in, maybe they'd heard of a Negroni, but it definitely didn't have the popularity that it has now, 15 years, 12 years later. And understanding the difference between a bitter and a vermouth and an Amaro and we'd been bringing back Italian bottles, vermouth and bitters, and from Spain and Italy, and putting them in a cabinet at the back. And so people were able to come and see historic bottles of Campari, which they would recognize, but it had this heritage to it. And then all these different Italian bitters that, had been kind of smuggled home, Contratto and Cappelletti and all these. And then there was a selection of vermouths as well. And I think that the ability to give people a bit of an educational moment and for them to understand that they could have variations of this drink, I think it was a real sophisticated moment that brought people back to try new drinks. And you know, the Negroni sessions, then we could also kind of hang our hat on as an identity piece, you know.
Right.
Like, yes, you can come for this is a historic cafe, it's been here 100 years, and you can come for coffee, but then also like come and learn about the Negroni, you know, and then also have some great food, and then and it just started to get some momentum.
Do you remember, is there like one point where you check the account and you're like, okay, like it's kind of taken off now?
I think it was when payroll stopped bouncing. I don't know. I don't know if it was a point where we were really getting going. But I mean, I think then in 2016, which was it was about 12 months later, we won Time Out. The Garibaldi won an award. It was like cocktail of the year, or I can't remember exactly what it was. But we won an award for the Garibaldi, and that was really that was about a year in. That was when we really started to get momentum. Yeah.
I want to talk really quickly before we talk about the continued success of Dante about also the attire that everyone wears. So was that Nathalie as well? How did you guys decide that and because it also feels like to me now, if you're sort of an Italian cafe bar in anywhere in the US, like they're basically borrowing the attire that everyone wears at Dante. So I don't know if you started that trend or
that's I'm so glad you asked that question, actually, and I wouldn't have even thought of it. But we talked a lot about we try to build this sense of kind of accessible luxury or accessible premium, where you know, you're not thinking, oh, I can't afford to go and do that today. I haven't got, you know, you should be able to step into Dante for a coffee and have a premium experience, you know, and we wanted it to be egalitarian and because we, right from the beginning, we forced ourselves to be open for breakfast, lunch and dinner every day, you know, and the restaurants are still open today, you know, 15 hours a day, every day, except for Christmas Day, you know, so, we want people to come in and use it as an amenity and as an extension of their living room. But to do that, it's got to be casual. And so we try to create like a very accessible moment. But we thought, if there's a casual waiter who's dressed down serving you, and you're going to have a casual experience. But if you step into like that casual environment that you kind of fall into, but the waiter's buttoned up, and initially we wanted white jackets, bow ties, you know, crisp white shirt, immediately, you know, like you would at Harry's Bar in Venice, or, you know, you have this, it's immediately elevated and you feel taken care of, or you feel that, okay, I might just be drinking an espresso, or I might just be drinking orange juice, fluffy orange juice, but it's that little moment is premium, you know, and I'm not having to pay for that premium. That's just what it is, you know, and espressos, you know, still $2.50 for an espresso, you know, and you can come in and sit there and have a $2.50 espresso and be served. I know this sounds simple and trivial, but be served filtered ice water on a coaster with a beautiful coffee set and great music and smart design, well-dressed waiters. That's the whole experience.
Yes.
You know, so yes, you know, our new waiters, our new bartenders, uniform is this beautiful white apron, which is not easy to keep clean, but it communicates that premium moment.
So Dante starts to take off, obviously, pretty quickly. You start winning a lot of cocktail bar awards as well. Had that been a goal for it to read cocktail bar to so many places? Because obviously it's an all-day cafe,
right,
and then you're winning these awards where it's like bar of the year, best bar in the world, all that stuff. And how did you sort of deal with that in addition to it still being a restaurant?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that, you know, and still today people perceive Dante as a bar, but, you know, we are restaurants with great bar programs. And, you know, I think in that context, you know, and the history of working with Saxon and Parole had won American Restaurant Bar of the Year in 2011 and 2013, you know, and so we were in that space of restaurant cocktail bar, and we had we attracted a really strong bar team, and that was really the area that we were the most comfortable with, and the easiest to define and to build that program. And so, I think that when you start building a business, look, if people are going to celebrate an aspect of it, you go with it, obviously. And I think that, and this is still a learning today for me. You come up with a concept and you write it on paper, and then you design it and you manifest it and you build it. And it's not until you actually present it to your guests that they define what the concept actually is. They're the ones ordering. You might have this vision of the Garibaldi being the hero, or fish on the wood fire grill in this way being the hero, or whatever it is. But it's not until they look at the menu and actually decide what's popular and what they're going to order that defines the direction that you go in. And as an owner operator and who's very hands-on, my wife and I are so hands-on in the business. I'm a big believer of give the people what they want. And listen to what they're ordering, and then and be able to pivot and go with it. So as the bar popularity grew, we continued obviously to support and curate our concept to support that what was interesting for me is that I felt like every 6 months for the first 5 years that we were open at Café Dante, and it was and that took us right up to COVID. Those first 5 years, we were constantly having to change the concept, evolve what we were doing to keep up with the demand, the volume, the level of intensity. It just kept getting more intense, and we had to keep shifting and evolving our program to keep up with it. And I think now, here we are 11 years later. The way we do things, like that we just opened in London in Mayfair, the way that we approach our mise en place, the way that the culture that we try to create amongst our team, and then what we put out is 100% as a result of being forged in that fire of a tiny space on McDougall Street, which we had no money to build out in, but we had to make the best of, and create within very limited boundaries. Where we are now as a result of the fact that we had to change the concept and evolve over those years to get to where we are now.
So obviously the investors were happy. It was doing very well. You were happy, hopefully able to pay yourselves more than you initially were. When did you decide that it was time to expand? And lots of people that have been on this show have other businesses. Often they don't take the same business and put it somewhere else, and especially they don't do that in the same city they're in. Right. So why was all of that part of what you did?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, like, for us, we had done a series of pop-ups, and I think that we were really one of the early bars to start to take our brand on the road.
I remember that, yeah.
And we were doing. We did all over the map, and I think that was a desire to, like, we had so much we wanted to put out there, and it was also a desire to travel and to learn new ideas and bring back new ideas and so on and so forth, and to keep our staff inspired. And I think it got to the point after 5 years where the amount of effort we were putting into these pop-ups, sometimes they were residences for a week or 2 weeks at a time. It was like starting a new business, and I think we thought, like, let's put this energy into building a new business of our own, and obviously we'd had good momentum and a track record that we could make it successful. And so we started exploring options to do another restaurant. And, and this is really Nathalie's philosophy, I guess, more than mine, although it's collectively ours now. If we can walk to our restaurants and we can touch the restaurants every day, and there's not a barrier to get there, then we're going to spend more time in them, and being able to walk between the restaurants was something that we wanted to be able to do. Okay. And so finding the space at West Village, on the corner of Hudson and Perry, an amazing corner. We're mid-block on McDougall Street, and McDougall Street is a wild street at the best of times, but felt a little bit more, I don't know, sophisticated, elevated, I don't know, on Hudson and Perry. And we had the opportunity to build something ourselves that we didn't just inherit. And at Café Dante, we really inherited that space, and we wanted to memorialize it in many ways. But then West Village was our chance to build something fresh, and so there was always going to be a point of difference. And the way I think about it, and I think that this applies to each of the Dantes, is that, you know, if you aspire to a certain brand, and let's just say that that might be a premium designer or a prestige designer, and you save up your money and you go and buy that special black handbag or that beautiful pair of black shoes that you wear with your suit at a special occasion or whatever it is, you know, you buy that and you love it because of not just because of the premium quality of the goods that are used to make it, but the craftsmanship, and you really then lean into that brand and you love it. But then the next year when you save up again and you're going to go and buy another pair of shoes or that handbag, you don't just go and buy another pair of black shoes. You see what else that fashion house designs, and you want to see what else they can do. You know, and so at Dante West Village, I was like, if we already have this captive crowd and they're going to want to see what else we can do, let's have the same DNA in terms of that all-day cafe, accessible, egalitarian moment. But instead of Negronis, let's do martinis. Instead of pizza and pasta, let's do a wood fire grill. You know, and here we have more license to be creative, as opposed to being pigeonholed into this 100-plus-year-old space that, you know, we don't have any money to build out properly. And you know, it's like driving Café Dante is like driving a 1970s car and repairing it while you're going 100 miles an hour, you know. And so at West Village, we thought, let's position it in the same vernacular, but with these little points of differences. So instead of Negroni sessions, we do a martini hour. And like I said, you know, we don't have any gas there, so we haven't done traditionally any pizza or pasta, but it's all about fish on the grill and beautiful steaks on the grill and what have you. And so there was a point of difference, but people would still recognize the name and the same community. And I think what we underestimated is, and this is a real New York thing, is the power of these micro communities. You know, a lot of the people who started coming to West Village, and because we opened during COVID, we could only seat outside. We didn't take any reservations. We only took walk-ins. It was all the neighbors. And so they would start to come in, and a lot of them hadn't been to Café Dante, even though it's 8 minutes walk, you know. And so we were able to build that community again up the road, but be able to walk between them. So as, you know, like at the end of the night, you know, often Nathalie and I will come by one of the restaurants and be there for closing, you know, or we're there first thing in the morning just as they're opening on a Sunday morning for brunch, you know, when notoriously, like, most people, you know, have slept in or what have you. But we're there at those critical times, and to be able to support the business and see where the opportunities are to improve it. And that's because we live locally and we can walk to the restaurants.
You had Seaport for a minute as well, yes?
Oh, yes, we did. And that was part of that pop-up program.
That was pop-ups,
yeah,
right?
That was a pop-up,
right.
Yeah.
And then you also had a business in like the Nolita area, yes?
Oh, yes, and that was another pop-up as well.
That was right.
Yeah, exactly.
They brought you in, right?
Yeah, exactly,
okay. So then when does Dante LA happen?
So in 2022, I think off the back of, you know, Dante winning #1 in the world's 50 best, Claridge's in London contacted us because they were launching a cocktail book. And Claridge's and the Connaught are sister hotels in Mayfair. And the Connaught had been #1 when we were #2, and then #2 when we were #1. And so there was this you know, relationship already. And so Claridge's said, we'd like to come and do a week pop-up at Dante to showcase a new cocktail book. And, you know, I think what we didn't know at the time was that they were also doing a summit for all the general managers of their hotels and executive team of their hotels in New York at the time. So they said, yes, we want to do a pop-up, but we're also going to, on the Monday, we're going to do a cocktail party. We're going to buy out the space on Tuesday for a dinner. On the Wednesday, we're going to do, you know, like a media event. And so I was like, this is great. Not only you're coming to a pop-up, but you're booking this space out 5 nights a week, you know. So, you know, being there for those 5 nights and 5 events, you know, it was the same executive team from the Maybourne Hotel Group, and I got to work with them and know them very well. You know, it was like this get to know each other week. Yeah. And off the back of it, they just launched Maybourne Beverly Hills 6 months prior, and they had this amazing rooftop. And they said, we need an American operator to help us launch the rooftop. Will you come and do a pop-up up there? And this was about the time when we were kind of popped out. And it's funny for me now to see these pop-ups because, it's guest bartender, and that's just not the way we do it. Like, we want to come, we want to immerse you in the brand, we want to bring everything, we bring it all. It's not just come and do a guest bartending shift. Like, you have these guest bartenders now that turn up like on the day of the pop-up expecting that you've done all their prep and they're just going to come and make the drinks. And it's just, for me, the antithesis of what it should be. It should be an immersive experience.
I agree with that, actually. I think if you're going to tell a consumer that they're going to experience, I don't know, not to pick on them, let's say Paradiso from Barcelona at a spot in New York City, it should feel like Paradiso.
Exactly. It should, the music, the uniform, and that takes time and planning. And anyway, so we put so much into these pop-ups. I said to them, look, I know that if we come and do that, it's going to be like opening a restaurant almost ourselves. So I said, why don't we just open a restaurant there? And they said no. And then about 3 months later, the general manager rang me and said, why don't you come and see the property and let's talk about it?
Okay.
And so we did. We went out and saw the property and fell in love with it. And as Australians, I think there was a real synergy to the cuisine, the produce, the lifestyle, the sunshine, and we felt like it was a real, at the time, we thought it was a halfway point between Australia and New York.
It has an incredible view too. I mean,
we really lucked out. Yeah. And so, Dante Beverly Hills was born, which was our first management deal. And I had always, again, we built Dante, and you look at Dante, it says Dante New York City 1915. And the New York City 1915 are initially two of the most important parts of that whole logo brand, because, it states, I think, the biggest brand in the world, which is New York City, shows heritage. And, we were bringing this concept to another city for the first time. And I learned a lot about that from the time with Avrico. Avrico really taught me about the management deals and how you could build a brand and how that brand then could have currency or momentum in other parts of the world because of key aspects, And so it was always our intention to be able to build a brand outside of the city, but we needed a great partner. And the 5-star hotels really provide that great partner, because at their core, it's the same real core of what we try to instill in Dante, which is, the guest experience and how you look after people. It doesn't have to be $5,000 a night. Doesn't have to be a $2,500 bottle of Petrus. It's just like how you treat people.
Yep.
And those hotels have that same aspiration. So with that alone as a shared goal, I knew we could build something special out there. And I think I'm grateful for the fire immersion of Greenwich Village, in the fact that we were newbies, because the Beverly Hills crowd were not much different.
Yeah.
And I was reminded every day, and I was on the ground there for the first 2 months, every service, and as with Nathalie, we uprooted and we were there, of the Beverly Hillbillies. Why that was a successful show, because it's such a small town, Beverly Hills. It's again, like you talk about a micro community, like that is a loyal, committed community who support their neighbors, and you have to take the time to get to know them, and we were able to build that relationship and be able to build that business as a result of it.
Amazing. And then was this new London project the next one, or?
So then we opened last year. We opened a space here on Bank Street called Aperitivo.
Yeah. Okay.
Which was opportunistic, to be honest. Like, Nat Freon had this wonderful corner, and she'd also worked at Avrico, and so I knew Nat, and she was a big supporter of ours at Café Dante, and she was looking to offload that space. Nat's on Bank, and that had always been a favorite corner of Nathalie's, and she, had been in love with it, and was kicking herself that she'd missed out on it when Nat had picked it up after COVID. So we took over that corner and did a new concept there called Aperitivo. And the goal with Aperitivo was that we wanted to really evolve the food and beverage menu a lot away from Dante, but still have that, I guess, that Mediterranean and Italian style. And Aperitivo was opened at a similar time to what we were doing, the pop-up in London. And I did agree to do another pop-up in London because when do you ever get the opportunity to have your restaurant at Claridge's, in Mayfair? So we'd done the pop-up. It was a big success. We developed menus. We opened Aperitivo with a lot of those menus and a lot of what those learnings were. And then, moving forward, 3 weeks ago, we opened a permanent location there in London and as Dante Mayfair.
And so is the one in Mayfair also a management deal? Or
yes.
So the management deals are LA and London, and then you guys run and operate the three in New York.
And we're big believers again in if you have a great partner, you can take your brand and outside of the city. But here in the city, we want to be able to touch the restaurants every day.
Makes sense.
And that's that kind of stretched us to, I guess, what is our, probably our most ambitious project yet, which is the building of Elizabeth Street. But the amazing piece there was, 2 years ago, our landlord at Café Dante, who, as I said earlier, we did a renovation in his space without telling him or anyone, so fast forward 11 years later, we've built a great relationship with him, and he said, look, we've taken over this building on Elizabeth Street. We'd love for you to come and have a look at it because, we'd like to offer it to you first. And I said to Nathalie, come on, let's go and have a look at it. And she goes, it's too far. And I was like, it's just no leader. She's like, it's too far. How are we going to go there every day? And anyway, I convinced her to come and have a look. And we stood outside the space and the building had been cleaned up and the floors had been cleaned up, but it's still the same structure. And she's like, this is public. This is public. And I said to our landlord, David, I said, was this public? He said, yeah, this is the public space. And so it was this amazing kind of
crazy full
serendipitous synchronicity, however you want to phrase it, moment. And I said, Nathalie, we've got to do this. And she the story she tells is that she then walked across the road, which is the Elizabeth Street Sculpture Garden, which had been in flux for 10 years. Like court case after court case turned down, and it got to the point, and we had not signed the deal yet, but it was sitting on Mayor Adams' table, and for him to either give it its longevity for like make it a public park or to shut it down and turn it into affordable housing. And on his last day of office, he signed the paper that would make it a permanent park. Which is. And she sat in that garden. She just was, and she was going through all these. She goes, "Do you remember we came to Public and had dinner here and talked about whether we should move to New York?" And I'd forgotten that. And she said, "We had a dinner here and we talked about it, yes and no." And ultimately, we walked out of dinner that night saying, "You're going to move to New York. I'm going to stay in Australia. We're going to make it work. I'll come to New York when I'm ready." And then to be given this opportunity to build out this space. Is still for me like such a great New York story. And Nathalie, like I said, who's designed all the spaces, including Beverly Hills, said, it's such a big space. I think we should talk to a designer about supporting the process, and so we brought in Avrico to design it with us.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
So this new space that we're building on Elizabeth Street, which I'm hoping will be ready in soon. Let's just say soon. Because every time I say 4 weeks, it's been 4 weeks for about 4 months, will be like such a full circle moment for us. And the lead designer is Adam Farmery. And Adam was the guy I met in 2006 in Australia at the Australian Bar Show, who got me thinking and excited about moving to New York. And he's been there with us every day. Again, and I remember building Saxon and Prole with Adam, and Adam would be in the dining room, like with a piece of wood, marking it with a pencil, saying to the contractor, "Cut it there. We want it. How high do you want it? Oh, okay, the service station." And it was totally design build, at Saxon and Prole, and all the journeys we've had together, and with Nathalie and her design journey as well. It's it's a special spot.
It's awesome. Same investors stay with you the whole time?
No. So 2.5 years ago. We bought out our Australian investors.
Wow! Congrats.
Raise money separate way to take them out and And I think that when we, as anybody does, and it's a great piece of advice I try to give to anybody who's starting out, you've got to value yourself. And I think that what we hadn't done initially was we didn't value what we brought to the table. If we were of the opinion, if you want to give us money, we'll give you equity.
Right.
You want back?
Probably until you didn't take a lot for yourselves, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had to reshift that, and brought in a great group of local New Yorkers who are really big supporters of the restaurants and have enabled us to fund this big project.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's been awesome having you on.
Yeah.
A real treat. I want to end the way we always do, which is 3 questions. The first one would be, you can only drink 1 cocktail at Dante. Which cocktail?
I don't know. What a question. And probably any other day you asked me, it would change. But right now, the fluffy pineapple margarita is we just put it on the menu, I think, yesterday. And this time of the season, you can't beat it. Black lava salt. Yeah.
So you've gotten the chance to work in amazing cities, to open places in amazing cities. You can open in one place. Where would you open and why?
I think we collectively as a family, because it really is a family business, and I have to speak for Nathalie and our kids.
Yep.
Would be Tokyo.
Cool.
Yeah, I think we would love to. I just, again, in the same way that we respect working with 5-star hotels and the way they treat their guests, I just love the craftsmanship in that Japanese culture, the attention to detail and the way that they build things, and I'd just love to be a part of that.
Cool. Finally, one piece of advice to someone that wants to operate their own food, beverage business.
I would say back yourself. I think that there's no shortcut in this industry. I don't think there's not a magic wand, and there's not special people who make it and others who don't. It's just hard work and backing yourself. And if you can really put the work in and commit, and it's full commitment, it's not half in, half out. If you can fully commit, you'll be successful.
That's a great piece of advice. Linden, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to VinePair's The Buildout. The show is produced, filmed, recorded, and edited by Darby Seasai. Editorial direction from VinePair's editor-in-chief, Joanna Sciarrino. Design of the logo by Marcello Bevilacqua. And thanks to the entire VinePair team, especially my co-founder, Joshua Mallon. I've been your host, Adam Teeter. Until next time, thanks for listening.